My rich uncle left me everything. A big house and $3 million. My parents who abandoned me 8 years ago suddenly showed up at the will reading. We're your guardians. They smiled. But when my lawyer came in, they turned pale. Your parents are here for the reading, Morrison's secretary whispered as I reached for the law office's door handle. My hand froze. 8 years of silence. And now Daniel and Patricia Winters had materialized the moment Uncle Marcus's $3 million estate was being distributed. Through the frosted glass, I could see their silhouettes already seated inside, probably calculating their share of money they'd never earned from a man they'd ridiculed. The security guard Morrison had stationed outside should have been my first clue that this wouldn't be a normal will reading. But to understand why their presence felt like walking into an ambush, I need to go back 8 years. To when I was 18 and still believed parents were supposed to protect their children, not pillage their futures. Back then, I lived in a cramped studio apartment near State University, working double shifts to afford tuition while my parents occupied our family's 2-bedroom rental across town. The apartment had become a graveyard of failed business ventures. Boxes of unsold dietary supplements gathered dust in corners. Stacks of motivational DVDs about unleashing your inner millionaire served as makeshift furniture. My father Daniel had quit his steady job at a furniture store 3 years earlier to become what he called an entrepreneur, though his definition of that word changed weekly depending on which get-rich-quick scheme had captured his attention. This particular February he was deep into something called CryptoPath Solutions, which wasn't actually cryptocurrency but some complicated pyramid structure involving digital tokens and recruitment bonuses. He'd spent our grocery money on the initial buy-in, convinced that we were about to become millionaires. My mother Patricia had caught his fever, quitting her receptionist job to support his ventures full-time. She spent her days creating vision boards from magazine cutouts and attending manifestation workshops that cost more than my weekly food budget. I survived on ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches, saving every penny from my job at the campus bookstore and my evening shifts at Murphy's Diner. 4 nights a week I'd serve coffee and pie to truckers and insomniacs until midnight, my textbooks spread across the back counter during slow periods. My manager, an older woman named Carol, would sometimes send me home with leftover soup or a sandwich that would just get thrown out anyway, though we both knew she was keeping me fed. The money I earned went into a dresser drawer in my bedroom at my parents' place, hidden behind winter sweaters in a manila envelope marked spring tuition. $3,200 accumulated over 18 months of exhaustion, grease burns, and paper cuts from handling too many books. It was supposed to cover my next semester, keeping me on track to graduate and escape the cycle of financial chaos my parents had created. Uncle Marcus was the only success story in our family, and my parents despised him for it. He'd built Blackwood Consulting from nothing, starting with a single client and a borrowed laptop, eventually growing it into a firm with 40 employees and contracts across 3 states. At family gatherings, which happened exactly twice a year, my parents would fawn over him to his face, then dissect his life the moment his Mercedes disappeared around the corner. Poor Marcus, my mother would sigh, stirring her 3rd glass of wine. All that money and completely alone. What good is success without love? He's forgotten his roots, my father would add, bitterness creeping into his voice. Probably looks down on all of us now. Thinks money makes him better. They never mentioned the birthday cards Marcus sent me without fail, always containing a $100 bill and the same brief message. For books and necessities. Education is your ladder up. That money had saved me countless times. When my laptop died during finals week, Marcus's birthday money bought a refurbished one. When temperatures dropped below freezing and my coat fell apart, his $100 got me through winter. The warning signs started small that February. My parents began asking strangely specific questions about my schedule. What time do you finish at the diner on Thursdays? My mother would ask, her voice artificially casual. Are you taking any morning classes this semester? They claimed they wanted to plan family dinners, though we hadn't shared a meal in months. Moving boxes appeared in their bedroom. Not the usual inventory boxes from failed ventures, but sturdy U-Haul boxes meant for relocating. When I questioned them, my mother's eyes shifted away. Just organizing. Getting rid of clutter for better energy flow. My father started taking all his calls outside, pacing the parking lot even in freezing rain. Through the window I could see him gesturing wildly, his face animated with excitement or desperation, I couldn't tell which. He'd return with his cheeks flushed, muttering about new opportunities and fresh starts, before disappearing into their bedroom with his laptop. The atmosphere in their apartment grew thick with secrets. Whispered conversations stopped abruptly when I entered rooms. Documents were hastily flipped over when I passed by. My father's laptop, previously left open on the kitchen table, was now password protected and snapped shut whenever I approached. My mother's behavior became particularly unsettling. She'd watch me during my brief visits home with an intensity that made me uncomfortable, as if she was trying to memorize every detail. Once, while I was collecting clean laundry, she grabbed me in a suffocating embrace, whispering, "You're stronger than you know, Juliet. Never forget that." When I pulled back, confused, tears were streaming down her face. She rushed to the bathroom before I could ask what was wrong. The final week of February, their apartment buzzed with manic energy. More boxes appeared. My mother started giving away possessions. Her collection of ceramic angels to the neighbor, cookbooks to the library, claiming she was simplifying for spiritual clarity. My father shredded documents late into the night, the sound of the machine grinding through my attempts to study. On Tuesday, I found an eviction notice taped to their door. 3 months behind on rent. When I confronted them, my father waved it off. Technical misunderstanding. It's being resolved. But I saw him pack our family photos into a box that night, handling each frame with the care of someone saying goodbye. Wednesday, my mother made my favorite dinner, lasagna from scratch, something she hadn't done in years. She watched me eat every bite, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen. "I want you to know," she said suddenly, "that everything we've done has been because we love you." "Mom, you're scaring me." "What's going on?" "Nothing, baby. Just eat." Thursday morning, I left for an early shift at the bookstore. When I returned that evening to grab my hidden tuition money before my night shift at the diner, the apartment was stripped bare. My parents, their belongings, and my $3,200 had vanished, leaving only a voicemail on my phone and the eviction notice still taped to the door, now addressed to no one. The voicemail notification glowed on my phone screen like a curse. 3:47 a.m. While I'd been pulling a double shift to make rent, my parents had been executing their escape plan. My finger hovered over the play button for several seconds before I found the courage to listen. "Juliet, baby, it's Mom." Her voice sounded thick, strangled. "We need to make a fresh start. We're drowning here and we're only pulling you down with us. Your father. The debts. It's worse than you know. Ask your Uncle Marcus for help. He has money. He'll take care of you. We're so sorry." The message ended with a sob that might have been genuine or might have been another performance. With them, I could never tell anymore. My legs gave out. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor of what used to be our living room, surrounded by dust outlines where furniture had stood just hours ago. The indentations in the carpet showed where the couch had been for 3 years. Rectangle shadows on the walls marked where family photos had hung. Even the ancient microwave that barely worked. Gone. I forced myself to stand and check my old bedroom, though I already knew what I'd find. The dresser drawers hung open like mouths frozen mid-scream. Behind the winter sweaters, where I'd hidden my tuition money in a manila envelope, there was nothing but empty space. $3,200. 18 months of grease burns, aching feet, and missed study sessions vanished. But the money wasn't even the worst part. My laptop, essential for school, taken. The pearl necklace my grandmother had left me before she died, the only thing of value I'd ever owned, gone. Even my winter coat, which they knew I'd need for my pre-dawn shifts, had disappeared. They'd been thorough in their pillaging, taking anything that could be sold or pawned, leaving me with nothing but the clothes I was wearing and textbooks they couldn't monetize. I walked through each room like a detective at a crime scene, cataloging the devastation. In their bedroom, wire hangers swayed in the empty closet. The bathroom had been stripped of everything except a bar of soap and a threadbare towel. The kitchen cabinet stood open and bare. They'd even taken the coffee maker I'd bought with my first paycheck from the diner. My phone buzzed with a text from my landlord. "Your parents cleared out around 4 a.m. Told me you knew about it. Left you in charge of the lease. Rent's due in 3 days. In charge of the lease. $700 a month for an apartment I couldn't afford on my own, with parents who'd just stolen my ability to pay for anything. The cruelty of it took my breath away. They hadn't just abandoned me, they'd sabotaged my future on their way out the door. I tried calling them. My father's phone went straight to a disconnected message. My mother's rang once before following suit. They'd probably ditched their phones the moment they crossed the state line, wherever they were heading. Nevada, maybe, where my father had talked about opportunities. Or Florida, where my mother had a cousin who'd married rich. Somewhere far enough that I couldn't follow even if I wanted to. The magnitude of my situation crashed over me in waves. No money for tuition meant no spring semester. No laptop meant no way to complete assignments even if I could somehow stay enrolled. No coat meant freezing through my early morning shifts. No parents meant no emergency contact, no cosigner for loans, no safety net of any kind. I sat there for maybe an hour, maybe two, paralyzed by the impossibility of it all. Then with trembling fingers I scrolled through my contacts to the M section. Marcus Blackwood. The uncle my parents had mocked for his success, then invoked as my salvation in the same breath they'd used to destroy my life. The phone rang twice before his deep voice answered. Juliet? It's rather late. Uncle Marcus. The words came out as a croak. They're gone. My parents, they took everything and left. Slow down. What do you mean they're gone? The apartment is empty. They took my tuition money, my laptop, everything. They left a voicemail saying to ask you for help. The words tumbled out between sobs I couldn't control. I don't know what to do. I have nothing. The rent is due and I can't. Stop. His voice cut through my hysteria with surgical precision. Are you hurt? No, I'm not hurt, I'm just. Are you safe right now? Yes, but. Then everything else can be fixed. I'm coming. Pack whatever they left behind. You don't understand, it's a 4-hour drive and there's a storm. I'm coming, he repeated, his tone allowing no argument. Pack what's left. Be ready. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, unable to process that help was actually coming. Uncle Marcus, who my parents had ridiculed as an emotional robot and a workaholic with no soul, had just dropped everything in the middle of the night to drive through a storm for me. I found a garbage bag under the kitchen sink, apparently not worth taking, and began collecting what remained of my life. Some clothes they deemed unsellable. My textbooks, too specialized to have resale value. Toiletries from my backpack. A photo album I'd hidden under my mattress that they'd somehow missed, filled with pictures from before everything went wrong. The rain started an hour after Marcus's call, gentle at first, then building to a deluge that hammered against the windows. I sat by the door with my garbage bag of possessions, watching the parking lot flood, wondering if he'd actually come or if this was another promise that would evaporate like all the others. 3 hours and 47 minutes after our call, headlights cut through the rain. A black Mercedes sedan pulled into the lot, looking absurdly out of place among the rust bucket cars and overflowing dumpsters. Marcus emerged, his expensive suit immediately soaked through, rain streaming down his face as he jogged toward the building. When I opened the door, he stood there for a moment taking in the scene, me with my garbage bag, the empty apartment behind me, the eviction notice I hadn't told him about taped to the door frame. His expression remained controlled, but something flickered in his eyes. Anger maybe. Or disappointment in his brother. Or pity for me. You have everything? He asked, water dripping from his jacket onto the stained hallway carpet. I held up the garbage bag. This is everything. He took it from me with one hand and placed the other on my shoulder. The weight of it felt solid, real, trustworthy in a way nothing had felt in years. You're safe now, he said simply. Let's go home. The Mercedes glided through the gates of Marcus's property as dawn broke through the storm clouds. I pressed my face against the window, watching manicured hedges and stone pathways emerge from the darkness. The house itself looked like something from an architecture magazine. 3 stories of cream-colored stone with black shutters, windows that seemed to go on forever, and a circular driveway with a fountain that wasn't running, probably shut off for winter. Marcus pulled into the garage, which was larger than my parents' entire apartment. Another car sat covered in the far bay, something sporty judging by the shape. Tools hung on pegboards in perfect alignment. Even his garage had more organization than my entire life. The guest room is upstairs, second door on the right, he said, killing the engine. We'll sort out something more permanent tomorrow. More permanent. The words hung between us as we entered through a mudroom bigger than my abandoned studio. Marcus disabled an alarm system with practiced efficiency while I stood there clutching my garbage bag, dripping rainwater onto tiles that probably cost more per square foot than I made in a week. The kitchen beyond the mudroom could have serviced a restaurant. Stainless steel appliances gleamed under pendant lights. An island dominated the center, its marble surface completely clear except for a single coffee maker that looked like it required an engineering degree to operate. Through an archway I glimpsed a dining room with a table for 12. "Are you hungry?" Marcus asked, already moving toward the refrigerator. "I'm fine," I lied, though I hadn't eaten since yesterday's lunch. He turned, fixing me with a look I would come to know well, patient but unwilling to accept polite deflection. "When did you last eat?" "Yesterday. Lunch." Without another word he began pulling items from the refrigerator. Eggs, bread, butter, orange juice. His movements were efficient, methodical. Within minutes, scrambled eggs and toast appeared on a plate he set firmly on the island. "Sit," he said, pointing to a bar stool. I remained standing, old habits from home making me uncomfortable with taking up space. "I can eat standing. I don't want to make a mess or—" "This is your home now." His voice carried an edge of authority that reminded me he ran a company with 40 employees. "Sit at the table like family." Family. The words stung and soothed simultaneously. I perched on the bar stool and forced myself to eat while he watched, his expression unreadable. After breakfast he showed me to the guest room. If I'd thought the kitchen was overwhelming, the bedroom left me speechless. A king-sized bed with enough pillows for 5 people. A bathroom with a soaking tub and separate glass shower. A walk-in closet larger than my studio apartment. The garbage bag of my possessions looked absurd in the corner. "Get some rest," Marcus said from the doorway. "We'll talk about next steps this afternoon." I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed, afraid to rumple the pristine white duvet, and tried to process the whiplash of the last 12 hours. Yesterday I'd been a struggling college student with neglectful parents. Today I was living in a mansion with an uncle I barely knew. That afternoon Marcus knocked and entered carrying a manila folder. He sat in the armchair across from the bed, maintaining professional distance even in offering help. "I've made some calls," he began, opening the folder. "Your enrollment can be maintained if we pay the outstanding balance by Friday. I've already arranged it." "I can't accept." "You can and you will." He pulled out a typed document. "However, there are conditions." My stomach clenched. Here it comes, I thought. Nothing is free. Everyone wants something. He handed me the paper. "House rules," he said simply. The list was thorough but not unreasonable. Maintain a 3.5 GPA. Work summers at Blackwood Consulting to learn the business. Attend Sunday dinners together. No overnight guests without permission. Keep my room and shared spaces clean. No drugs or excessive alcohol. Weekly check-ins about school progress. This is it. I asked, searching for hidden catches. "Were you expecting something else?" "I don't know. More restrictions? Payback terms?" His expression softened marginally. "This isn't a loan, Juliet. It's an investment in your future. Your parents failed you. I won't." Over the following weeks, I learned to navigate Marcus's world of routine and discipline. Breakfast at 7 sharp, though he never complained if I stumbled in at 7:03, still adjusting to the early schedule. He'd already be reading the Financial Times, a second cup of coffee waiting for me, dark roast with 1 sugar, which he'd somehow noticed I preferred without asking. The refrigerator began stocking items I hadn't seen him buy. My favorite yogurt, the granola bars I'd survived on during exam weeks, fresh fruit that appeared daily. When I mentioned needing new supplies for the semester, a credit card appeared with my name on it. "For necessities," he said, sliding it across the breakfast table. "Books, supplies, food. Don't go crazy, but don't go without." I used it sparingly at first, terrified of overstepping. But when the statements came, he never questioned a single purchase. Not even when I'd bought a new winter coat to replace the one my parents had stolen. 3 weeks after I'd moved in, I found a business card on my pillow. Dr. Sarah Chin, licensed therapist, specializing in family trauma and abandonment. The appointment was already scheduled for the following Tuesday. "I don't need therapy," I protested over dinner that night. Marcus looked up from his salmon. "Your parents stole your tuition money and abandoned you. That requires professional processing. It's expensive. I'm aware of the cost. I'm handling it fine." He set down his fork with deliberate precision. Last night at 3 a.m. I heard you in the kitchen. You've been there every night this week. That's not handling it fine. I hadn't realized he'd noticed my insomnia, my midnight wanderings through his house as I tried to convince myself this was real, that I wouldn't wake up back in that empty apartment. Dr. Chin turned out to be exactly what I needed, direct but compassionate, unwilling to let me deflect with humor or minimization. Marcus never asked what we discussed, but I noticed him watching sometimes, checking if therapy days were particularly hard, adjusting his expectations accordingly. The years that followed blurred together in a rhythm of semesters and summers, each one building on the foundation Marcus had provided. My therapy sessions with Dr. Chin gradually shifted from crisis management to growth work. We spent less time on the acute trauma of abandonment and more on recognizing patterns, setting boundaries, and understanding that my worth wasn't tied to productivity or perfection. Marcus never asked about therapy directly, but he noticed the changes. When I stopped apologizing for existing in his space, he nodded approvingly. When I began joining him for breakfast without being summoned, he had my coffee ready without comment. Small victories that felt monumental after years of making myself invisible in my parents' chaos. My first summer at Blackwood Consulting started with filing and coffee runs, which I attacked with an intensity that made Marcus pull me aside. "This isn't a test you can fail," he said, studying me over his reading glasses. "You're learning, not proving. There's a difference." By the third summer, I was sitting in client meetings, taking notes while Marcus negotiated contracts worth more than my parents had ever dreamed of stealing. He'd catch my eye occasionally, a silent question. "Did you catch that? Are you following?" Always was. I absorbed everything. The way he never filled silence too quickly, how he let clients talk themselves into solutions, the art of being the calmest person in any room. Senior year arrived with job offers from companies that had seen me at Blackwood during summers. Marcus said nothing when I showed him the letters, just raised an eyebrow that communicated everything. Of course I was joining his firm. We both knew it, had known it since that first summer when I'd reorganized his filing system and he'd said, "Efficient. Like someone else I know." Graduation day came in May, unseasonably hot, the ceremony held in the university's basketball arena. I spotted Marcus immediately in the crowd, impossible to miss in his charcoal suit among the casual clothes of other families. He didn't whoop when they called my name, didn't stand and wave like the enthusiastic parents around him. He simply nodded once when our eyes met, and that single gesture held more pride than any celebration. At dinner that night, at the same Italian restaurant where we'd had our first Sunday dinner 4 years earlier, he slid a single key across the white tablecloth. "Your office at Blackwood. You start Monday." No congratulations. No proud speech about how far I'd come. Just the key and the expectation that I'd show up, because showing up was everything to Marcus. It was his language of love, spoken in attendance rather than words. The office was modest. 3rd floor, a window overlooking the parking lot rather than the city view the senior consultants enjoyed. But it was mine, my name already on the door in the same font as his. Inside he'd placed a single item on the desk. A photo from my graduation, the two of us standing awkwardly apart but undeniably together. Work became my religion. I threw myself into client presentations, strategic planning sessions, and financial analyses with the same desperate energy I'd once used to save tuition money. The difference was that now the work led somewhere. Each successful project meant more responsibility, larger clients, and gradually respect from colleagues who'd initially seen me as the boss's charity case. Nights were harder. Success couldn't stop the dreams where I still heard that voicemail, still walked into that empty apartment. I'd wake at 3 a.m. and Google my parents' names, finding nothing but old addresses and disconnected phone numbers. They'd vanished as completely as if they'd never existed, leaving me to wonder if they were alive, dead, or simply living new lives under new names somewhere. Dr. Chin and I worked through it slowly. "Abandonment shapes you but doesn't define you," she said during one session that left me raw. "You're not responsible for their choices, only for how you choose to move forward." 5 years into working at Blackwood, Marcus started missing morning meetings. Small things at first. A forgotten client name, a tremor in his hand while signing contracts. He scheduled a routine checkup that turned into blood tests that turned into scans that turned into a specialist consultation that ended with words that seemed impossible. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3. The man who'd built an empire from nothing, who'd saved me from nothing, suddenly couldn't button his own shirt without his hands shaking. The reversal felt surreal. I became the one making breakfast at 7 sharp, driving him to appointments, sitting in waiting rooms that smelled like disinfectant and despair. "I can handle the treatments alone," he insisted after the first chemotherapy session left him weaker than I'd ever seen him. "You could," I agreed, steadying him as we walked to the car. "But you don't have to." He looked at me then with an expression I'd never seen, vulnerable, almost surprised. As if the concept of not handling something alone was foreign to him. Which I realized it probably was. The treatments bought us time but not hope. Marcus approached death like he'd approached everything else, with preparation and precision. He updated his will, transferred client relationships, and taught me the intricate details of running Blackwood with the patience of someone who knew they wouldn't get a second chance to explain. 3 nights before the end, I was reading quarterly reports in his room while he dozed. A routine we'd developed where I worked and he rested, but we were together. His breathing was labored, each inhale a conscious effort. Suddenly his hand found mine, grip surprisingly strong. "Juliet," he said, voice barely above a whisper. I leaned closer, expecting final instructions about the business or investments. "I never wanted children," he said instead, each word careful and deliberate. "Thought I wasn't built for it. Too rigid. Too cold. Marcus. Let me finish." His eyes, clouded by medication and pain, found focus. "You taught me that family isn't about wanting. It's about choosing. Every day. Especially when it's hard." His hand remained in mine for another moment before releasing, his eyes closing with exhaustion from the effort of speaking. 3 days later, Marcus Blackwood died at 4:17 a.m. while I held that same hand, feeling it grow cold as dawn broke through the hospice window. The funeral director suggested a Tuesday service, allowing time for notifications and arrangements. I spent those days in a fog, mechanically selecting caskets and flowers while my mind replayed his final words. The Blackwood consulting team stepped up without being asked, handling logistics I couldn't face. His secretary Margaret, who'd worked with him for 15 years, simply appeared at the house with a black dress in my size and a gentle reminder to eat something. Tuesday arrived gray and fitting. The funeral home had suggested the smaller chapel, but I'd insisted on the larger one, expecting Marcus's influence to draw crowds. Instead, 43 people scattered themselves across pews meant for 200. Business associates occupied the middle rows, maintaining professional distance even in grief. A handful of clients sat near the back, checking phones between hymns. The front row held only me. No cousins emerged from distant states. No childhood friends materialized with stories of young Marcus. No former lovers appeared with tearful remembrances. The man who'd saved my life had lived his entirely alone except for the final 8 years with me, and even then we'd existed in parallel more than together. 2 people sharing space, gradually learning to be family through proximity and necessity rather than blood or choice. The eulogies reflected this isolation. Robert Henley from Chase Banking praised Marcus's strategic vision. Sandra Liu from Morrison Enterprises commended his negotiation skills. Tom Bradley from the Chamber of Commerce noted his community contributions. They spoke of Marcus the businessman, the consultant, the strategic mind. Not one mentioned Marcus the person who'd memorized my coffee order or sat through my college graduation in uncomfortable bleachers or learned to say, "I'm proud of you," only through presence. I'd been asked to speak but couldn't find words that felt adequate. How do you eulogize someone who saved you through rigid structure and silent support? How do you explain that love sometimes looks like typed house rules and standing breakfast appointments? Instead, I remained silent in the front row, letting others fill the space with professional accomplishments while I mourned the personal moments they'd never seen. After the service, mourners filed past with practiced condolences. "He was a brilliant mind," they said. "The business world won't be the same. His legacy will continue through the firm." Empty words from empty suits, all eager to return to their offices and normal lives where death was just an inconvenient calendar interruption. Harold Morrison lingered as others departed, his usual attorney composure noticeably strained. He'd been Marcus's lawyer for 25 years, but today something in his expression suggested more than professional obligation. "Juliet," he said quietly, guiding me away from the remaining mourners. "We need to discuss the will reading scheduled for tomorrow." "Can't it wait? I haven't even. There are documents you need to see first." His voice dropped lower, eyes scanning the room as if checking for eavesdroppers. Things Marcus prepared in case certain people surface. The way he emphasized certain people made my stomach clench. What people? Marcus didn't have anyone. Morrison's jaw tightened. The reading is at 10 tomorrow morning. Come to my office at 9. There are files you should review privately first. He squeezed my shoulder, the gesture surprisingly paternal from such a formal man. Marcus was thorough in his preparations. Trust that. I returned to Marcus's house. My house now, though I couldn't think of it that way, and found myself in his study, surrounded by the life he'd documented with obsessive precision. Filing cabinets lined one wall, each drawer labeled by year and category. Investment strategy 2018 to 2020. Tax documents 2015 to 2017. Business correspondence 2021 to 2023. One label stopped me cold, GW protection. My initials. Protection from what? The drawer was locked, but Marcus had shown me where he kept keys during his final weeks, ensuring I could access everything necessary. Inside, manila folders bore dates rather than descriptions. I pulled the most recent, dated just 2 months ago, and found bank statements I didn't recognize. Regular monthly transfers to Davidson Investigative Services. 7 years of payments, $500 monthly like clockwork. Why had Marcus been paying a private investigator for 7 years? Almost the entire time I'd lived with him. Deeper in the drawer, I found correspondence with the investigation firm, but the letters were vague, referencing only ongoing surveillance and quarterly reports as requested. The reports themselves were nowhere in the file, as if Marcus had kept them elsewhere or destroyed them after reading. At the very back, I discovered a sealed manila envelope with my name written across it in Marcus's precise handwriting. Below my name he'd added, to be opened only with Morrison present at the official will reading. I held it up to the light, desperate to know what required such formality, but the paper was too thick to reveal anything. Whatever Marcus had written, he'd wanted witnesses when I read it, which meant it was either very important or very problematic. The next morning arrived too quickly. I'd barely slept, alternating between grief and anxiety about Morrison's warnings. The house felt cavernous without even the possibility of Marcus returning, every room echoing with absence. I arrived at Morrison's office at 8:45, unable to wait longer. His secretary, the same woman who'd whispered my parents' presence yesterday, though that felt like a lifetime ago now, showed me to a conference room I'd never seen before. Morrison was already there, several expandable folders arranged on the mahogany table. His expression when I entered confirmed my worst fears before he even spoke. Juliet, I need to prepare you for something unexpected. He gestured for me to sit, pulling one folder closer. Last night after I left the funeral, I received a call at my home. Your parents have surfaced. The words didn't make sense at first, like he'd spoken in a foreign language my brain couldn't process. They saw Marcus's obituary in the online edition of the Tribune, he continued carefully. They've indicated their intention to attend tomorrow's will reading. That's not possible. My voice sounded distant, hollow. They've been gone for 8 years. They can't just. They claim to be asserting their rights as your legal guardians. Morrison's tone suggested his opinion of this claim, but his expression remained professionally neutral. They've hired representation. A Mr. Gerald Hoffman from Las Vegas. Las Vegas. Of course they'd been in Las Vegas. The city where desperate people go to chase miracles and lose everything. Morrison's revelation hung in the air between us, the implications spreading like spilled ink across my understanding of the situation. Legal guardians? I managed to say, though my throat felt constricted. I'm 26 years old. They abandoned me when I was 18. What possible claim could they have? Morrison's expression remained carefully professional, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes. Their attorney will likely argue that parental rights were never formally terminated through the courts. It's a weak position, but they appear prepared to pursue it. He paused, choosing his next words with lawyer-like precision. Marcus anticipated this possibility. The documents in these folders represent 7 years of preparation for exactly this scenario. The door to Morrison's office opened before I could respond. His secretary appeared, her face apologetic but firm. Mr. Morrison, the other parties have arrived for the 10 o'clock reading. My body went rigid. 8 years of absence, and they'd chosen this moment for their grand return. Morrison stood, straightening his tie with methodical precision. "Remember," he said quietly, "you are the sole beneficiary. Nothing they say or do changes that." Marcus made certain of it. We walked down the hallway toward the main conference room, my legs feeling disconnected from my body. Through the frosted glass doors I could make out shapes already seated inside. Morrison's hand briefly touched my elbow, a gesture of support that helped ground me in the moment. He opened the door and time seemed to slow. They sat at the far end of the conference table like actors who'd arrived early to claim the best positions. My father, Daniel, had gained significant weight, his belly straining against a navy suit that was clearly too small, the jacket unable to button across his expanded middle. His hair, once thick and dark, had thinned to wisps he tried to arrange strategically across his scalp. The fluorescent lights caught the sheen of perspiration already forming on his forehead. My mother, Patricia, looked simultaneously older and desperately trying to appear younger. Her dress, a purple number with shoulder pads that screamed previous decade, hung loosely on her diminished frame. She dyed her hair an aggressive blonde that only emphasized the gray roots already showing at her scalp. When she saw me, her face transformed into a practiced expression of maternal concern that might have fooled someone who hadn't watched her rehearse emotions in mirrors. "Julie, darling," she said, rising from her chair with arms outstretched, moving toward me with the determination of someone who'd planned this moment. I remained frozen in the doorway, unable to move forward or back. Her arms encircled me in an embrace that smelled of drugstore perfume and something else. Desperation maybe, or the particular scent of people who'd been living in hotels and other temporary spaces. I stood rigid, arms at my sides until she finally stepped back. "You look wonderful," she said, her eyes conducting a rapid inventory of my appearance. The tailored black dress Margaret had brought, the pearl earrings Marcus had given me for my college graduation, the watch that had been his and was now mine. "So sophisticated. Marcus clearly took good care of you. We're here to help you through this difficult time, sweetheart," my father added, remaining seated but offering what he probably thought was a paternal smile. "As your parents, your legal guardians, we know this must be overwhelming." The words were rehearsed, their delivery slightly off, like actors who'd memorized lines but hadn't understood the character's motivation. Their eyes weren't on me but scanning the room. Morrison's leather-bound books, the oil paintings on the walls, the mahogany table that probably cost more than they'd ever earned in a year. A thin man in an ill-fitting gray suit stood near my parents, clutching a briefcase that had seen better days. "Gerald Hoffman," he said, extending a hand I didn't take. "I represent Mr. and Mrs. Winters in this matter." "What matter?" I asked, finding my voice at last. "This is a will reading, not a negotiation." Hoffman's smile was oleaginous, the expression of someone used to operating in the margins of respectability. "Well, that remains to be seen, doesn't it? Your parents have certain concerns about your ability to manage such a substantial inheritance without proper guidance." Morrison intervened smoothly, gesturing to chairs. "Let's all sit down and proceed with the reading. Everything else can be addressed afterward." I took a seat as far from my parents as the table allowed, noting how their eyes tracked my movement, how my mother's fingers drummed against her purse, a designer knockoff with uneven stitching, and how my father kept clearing his throat, a nervous habit I remembered from childhood when he was about to pitch another doomed scheme. Morrison opened his leather portfolio with deliberate ceremony, withdrawing a sealed envelope. "This is the last will and testament of Marcus Theodore Blackwood, executed 6 months ago in the presence of witnesses and filed with this office for safekeeping." He broke the seal and unfolded several pages of thick cream paper, Marcus's letterhead visible at the top. "I'll read the essential provisions first, then provide copies to relevant parties." Morrison adjusted his glasses and began. "I, Marcus Theodore Blackwood, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils." My parents leaned forward simultaneously, their attention laser-focused on Morrison's words. "To my niece, Juliette Marie Winters, I leave the entirety of my estate, including but not limited to, the real property located at 2847 Riverside Drive, valued at approximately $1.8 million, including all contents and the surrounding 3 acres of land." I heard my mother's sharp intake of breath, saw my father's hand clench on the table. All bank accounts, investment portfolios and liquid assets, totaling approximately $3.1 million as of the date of this will's execution. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. My father's face flushed red while my mother's went pale. My 40% ownership stake in Blackwood Consulting Group, with full voting rights and all associated benefits and responsibilities. Additionally, all personal effects including but not limited to my collection of first edition books, vintage watches, automobiles and art. Morrison paused, looking up from the document. There are several smaller bequests to employees and charitable organizations, which I can detail if necessary, but the bulk of the estate passes to Ms. Winters as stated. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of traffic from the street below, my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. My parents sat frozen, their calculations visible on their faces as they processed what they'd just heard. My father was the first to break the silence, his voice cracking slightly as he attempted to regain control. "Excuse me, Mr. Morrison, but as Juliet's parents, we have a natural interest in ensuring this inheritance is properly managed. She's still quite young and this is an enormous responsibility." 26 is hardly a child, Morrison observed, his tone dry as sandpaper. "Legally speaking," my mother interjected quickly, her fingers still drumming against her purse, "we never formally terminated our parental rights. Given the circumstances of this windfall, we feel it's our duty to provide guidance during this transition." Morrison's expression remained neutral as he reached for another folder, this one significantly thicker than the will documents. Mr. Blackwood anticipated potential complications. He instructed me to share certain documentation if necessary. He opened the folder with deliberate slowness, withdrawing a stack of photographs. "These are from Davidson Investigative Services, dated 6 months after you left Juliet." He slid the first photo across the polished table. My father at a blackjack table in what looked like a low-rent Vegas casino, his face flushed with either excitement or alcohol, chips scattered in front of him. "How dare you have us followed?" my father sputtered, his face reddening further. Morrison continued as if he hadn't spoken, sliding another photo forward. "This one is from 8 months after your departure." My mother behind a bar, serving drinks in what appeared to be a casino lounge, her uniform revealing more than it covered. "The investigation indicates you were terminated from this position for suspected theft, though charges were never filed." My mother's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the color draining from her face. "That was a misunderstanding. The registered discrepancy was never proven to be." "The pattern continued," Morrison interrupted, producing a document. "Daniel Winters arrested twice for check fraud in Arizona. Charges dropped due to insufficient evidence, but the arrest records remain." Hoffman, my parents' attorney, finally found his voice. "This surveillance constitutes a gross invasion of privacy. These documents would never be admissible in." "We're not in court, Mr. Hoffman," Morrison replied coolly. "We're establishing context for why Mr. Blackwood structured his estate as he did." He withdrew another set of papers. "Patricia Winters, terminated from 3 separate positions over 5 years. Sunrise Dental Office, reason listed as misappropriation of petty cash. Desert Springs Resort, inventory discrepancies. Maxwell's Department Store, violation of employee purchase policies." Each revelation felt like another brick in a wall between us. These weren't the parents who'd raised me, who'd once taken me to the park on Sundays and helped with homework. These were strangers who'd spent 8 years becoming people I didn't recognize, or perhaps revealing who they'd always been beneath the parental facade. "Multiple eviction notices," Morrison continued, laying out documents like playing cards. 6 different addresses in 8 years. Small claims court judgments from landlords seeking back rent. A bankruptcy filing 2 years ago listing debts of over $70,000. "People struggle," my father said weakly, sweat now visibly beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "That doesn't make us criminals." Morrison reached for another document, this one bearing the letterhead of a predatory lending company. "This loan application is from 6 months ago. Particularly interesting is the co-signer section." He slid it toward me and I leaned forward to read, my stomach dropping as I recognized my own name in unfamiliar handwriting. They listed me as a guarantor? My voice came out strangled. With a forged signature? Not just listed, Morrison clarified. They provided your social security number, your current address, Marcus's address, and claimed you had agreed to guarantee a loan of $25,000. The betrayal shouldn't have surprised me after 8 years, but somehow it did. While I'd been caring for Marcus through his cancer treatments, while I'd been wondering if they were even alive, they'd been attempting to destroy my credit, to use my name for their schemes. We never submitted that application, my mother protested, but her voice lacked conviction. The loan company verified the application came from your IP address in Las Vegas, Morrison stated. They declined it when they couldn't verify Juliet's consent, but the attempt was documented. My father's attorney Hoffman shuffled through his own papers nervously. These are serious accusations. Without proof. Would you like to see the emails? Morrison asked, producing another folder. These are communications between Daniel and Patricia Winters from 3 years ago. He began reading aloud. Subject line, approaching M about J. Message, Marcus has money to burn. If we play the family card right, emphasize Juliet needs our guidance, he might set up a trust we can access. My mother made a sound between a gasp and a sob. You had no right to access our private. Actually, Morrison interrupted, these emails were obtained legally when you attempted to use a public library computer to access Marcus's company website repeatedly, triggering our security protocols. Our IT department preserved them as potential evidence of attempted corporate espionage. He pulled out another email. This one is particularly illuminating. If Marcus won't help directly, maybe we can convince Juliet we want to reconcile. She was always soft-hearted. Once we're back in her life, we can work on the money angle. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Every fear I'd had about their motivations, every suspicion Dr. Chen had helped me work through validated in their own words. Those were taken out of context, my father said desperately. We were struggling, yes, but we always intended to reconnect with Juliet properly. 4 times, Morrison stated flatly. You contacted Marcus 4 times over 8 years seeking money. Each time claiming it was for Juliet's benefit, though she was already living with him and wanting for nothing. Each time he declined to respond. He reached for the sealed envelope I'd found in Marcus's study, the one with my name on it. Which brings us to Mr. Blackwood's final communication on this matter. He handed it to me. He requested you read this aloud if your parents appeared at the will reading. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Marcus's precise handwriting filled the page, dated just 3 months ago when he'd known the cancer was winning. I cleared my throat and began reading. Juliet, if you're reading this, your parents have surfaced to claim what they never earned. Know that I've been monitoring them since the day they abandoned you. Not out of malice, but to protect you from further harm. I paused, glancing at my parents. My mother was crying now, though whether from shame or frustration at being caught I couldn't tell. They've attempted to contact me 4 times seeking money, each time claiming it was for your benefit. They've attempted to use your name and credit without consent. They've schemed and planned how to manipulate both of us for financial gain. The evidence Morrison has shown you represents only a portion of what I've documented. I continued reading Marcus's letter, my voice growing stronger with each word. The estate has been structured in protective trusts that require Morrison's co-signature for any substantial withdrawals. The house cannot be sold or leveraged for 5 years. These measures exist not because I doubt your judgment, but because I know the lengths to which desperate people will go when money is involved. Don't let guilt override logic. They chose their path 8 years ago. True family shows up when you need them, not when you have something they want. Remember that I chose you every day for 8 years. That is what parents do. All my love, Marcus. The conference room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. I folded the letter carefully, treating it with the reverence it deserved. Marcus's final act of protection, reaching out from beyond death to shield me one last time. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound that made everyone flinch. This is character assassination, he shouted, his carefully rehearsed composure completely shattered. Marcus poisoned you against us from the beginning. He wanted you for himself, wanted to play father to make up for his empty life. Daniel, sit down, Hoffman urged, tugging at his client's sleeve, but my father shook him off. We could make this very public, he continued, his voice rising with each word. Tell everyone how Marcus Blackwood stole our daughter, turned her against her real family. The media would eat it up. Wealthy businessman manipulates vulnerable young woman, isolates her from her parents. My mother stood too, tears streaming down her face, though her eyes held calculation rather than genuine emotion. We were sick, Daniel with his gambling addiction, me with depression. We needed help, not judgment. What kind of man keeps a daughter from her parents when they're suffering from illness? The way she framed their abandonment as illness rather than choice made my blood burn. They had rewritten history in their minds, transforming their deliberate decisions into circumstances beyond their control. Addiction and depression are real conditions, I said, standing slowly, my legs surprisingly steady. But you chose to steal my tuition money. You chose to take grandmother's jewelry. You chose to leave without saying goodbye. Those were decisions, not symptoms. You don't understand what we went through, my mother wailed, reaching across the table toward me. The pressure, the debts, the threats. I was 18 years old, I interrupted, my voice cutting through her performance. Working 2 jobs while going to school full-time. I understand pressure perfectly. The difference is I didn't run from it. Morrison intervened with his characteristic calm. Mr. and Mrs. Winters, before you continue with threats of public disclosure, you should be aware of additional provisions in Mr. Blackwood's will. He turned to a marked page in his documents. Any legal challenge to the estate's distribution triggers an immediate and irrevocable transfer of all assets to the Marcus Blackwood Foundation for Abandoned Youth. Neither Juliet nor yourselves would receive anything. My father's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. That's coercion. You can't. It's perfectly legal, Morrison continued. Furthermore, regarding your threats of going public, I have here documentation of $18,000 stolen from Juliet. The tuition money, the cashed-out college fund, the pawned jewelry. I have the forged loan applications, the fraudulent use of her social security number, the attempted identity theft. He paused, letting each crime sink in. Would you prefer criminal charges or would you rather leave quietly? Hoffman whispered urgently in my father's ear, his face pale as he presumably explained the legal ramifications of what Morrison had just outlined. My mother sank back into her chair, her theatrical tears giving way to genuine panic. You're destroying your family, my father said, his voice now hoarse from shouting. Over money. Is that what Marcus taught you? That money matters more than blood. The accusation might have hurt if I hadn't spent 8 years in therapy working through these exact manipulations. Marcus taught me that family is about showing up. Every day. Consistently. Reliably. You taught me that blood relationships can be weapons people use to justify taking what they haven't earned. We're your parents, my mother said desperately, her mascara running in black streams down her cheeks. We gave you life. The words triggered something that had been building for 8 years, a response that came from the deepest part of my healing. You gave me life, then you almost destroyed it. Marcus gave me a future. He earned the title of parent by being present for every small moment you missed. Every birthday, every graduation, every nightmare, every success. He was there while you couldn't even leave a forwarding address. This isn't over, my father snarled, his mask completely gone now, revealing the desperate man beneath. We have rights. We'll contest this will. Morrison pressed a button on the conference room phone. Security to conference room 3, please. My father lunged forward, grabbing my arm with enough force to leave marks. You ungrateful little. Don't touch me. I pulled away, but he held on, his fingers digging into my skin. You owe us, he hissed, his breath hot and stale. For 18 years of raising you, feeding you, clothing you. That's called being a parent, I said, jerking my arm free just as 2 security guards entered the room. It's the minimum requirement, not a debt to be collected later. The guards moved toward my parents with professional efficiency. My mother stood, clutching her knockoff purse like a shield. You'll regret this, Juliet. When you're alone with nothing but money for company, you'll realize what you've thrown away. I'm not alone, I said quietly. I have the business Marcus built, the employees who respected him, the clients who trusted him, the foundation we planned together. I have a life built on genuine relationships, not transactions. As the security guards escorted them toward the door, My father turned back one more time. $3 million won't buy you happiness. No, I agreed. But it will protect me from people who think they can buy my forgiveness. My mother's final words echoed down the hallway as they were led away. We're still your parents. We'll always be your parents. Morrison waited until the elevator doors closed before speaking. There's a restraining order prepared if you wish to file it. I nodded, exhausted but oddly clear-headed. Do it. Everything necessary to protect the estate and myself. Morrison's office fell quiet after my parents' dramatic exit, the kind of silence that follows a storm. I signed the restraining order paperwork with a steady hand, though inside I felt hollow, scraped clean by the confrontation. Morrison's secretary brought me water in a crystal glass that I held but didn't drink, my mind still processing what had just happened. The restraining order will be served within 24 hours, Morrison said, reviewing the documents. It prohibits them from coming within 500 feet of you, your home, or your place of business. Any violation will result in immediate arrest. I nodded, knowing paperwork rarely stopped desperate people. Marcus had taught me to plan for contingencies, to never assume a single barrier would be enough. What about the forgery? The identity theft? We can pursue criminal charges if you wish. The evidence is substantial enough for prosecution. The words hung between us. Criminal charges against my own parents. 8 years ago that thought would have destroyed me. Now it felt like a practical consideration, nothing more. I left Morrison's office and drove back to Marcus's house. My house, though I still couldn't think of it that way. The massive structure felt even emptier now, echoing with absence. I walked through the rooms, touching furniture Marcus had chosen, looking at artwork he'd collected, trying to feel his presence in the things he'd left behind. That evening, Margaret from the office called to check on me. Word had already spread through the company about the confrontation at Morrison's office. Everyone's talking about it, she said gently. How are you holding up? I'm fine, I said automatically, then caught myself using the same deflection I'd criticized in others. Actually, I'm not fine. But I will be. The next 2 days passed in a blur of condolences and business decisions. I forced myself to go to the office to sit in Marcus's chair, my chair now, and review contracts he'd been negotiating. The work helped, giving my mind something concrete to focus on besides the image of my parents being escorted out by security. Then on the third day the doorbell rang. It was early evening, the sun casting long shadows across the driveway. Through the security monitor I could see them standing at the front door. My father's face was flushed red, whether from anger or alcohol I couldn't tell. My mother stood beside him, mascara smeared, clutching tissues. They knew about the cameras, they had to, but they rang again anyway, longer this time, pressing the button like persistence could erase 8 years of absence. I shouldn't have answered. Morrison had explicitly advised against any contact. But something in me needed this final confrontation, needed to hear what they'd say when all pretense was stripped away. I opened the door but kept the security chain engaged, speaking through the gap. You're violating a restraining order. I've already called the police. 5 minutes, my father said, his words slightly slurred. Just give us 5 minutes to explain. Explain what? How you tried to forge my signature. How you attempted to steal my identity. How you planned to manipulate Marcus for money. We're desperate, my mother sobbed, and for once it seemed genuine. We've lost everything. The casino is threatening legal action over markers Daniel signed. We're living in our car. The revelation should have sparked sympathy, but I felt nothing. They'd been living in cars and cheap motels by choice, chasing schemes instead of stability, choosing the next big score over the mundane reliability of regular jobs and responsibilities. We just need 50,000, my father said, abandoning any remaining pretense of parental concern. Just enough to clear the debts and get back on our feet. You have 3 million. 50,000 is nothing to you now. There was. The truth laid bare. They hadn't come back for reconciliation or to rebuild our relationship. I was just a bank account that happened to share their DNA. After everything we've been through, my mother added, you owe us that much. I owe you. The words came out calm, controlled, though inside I burned. Let me be clear about what happened. You stole my tuition money, $3,200 I'd saved over 18 months. You took grandmother's pearl necklace, the only thing I had from her. You cashed out my college fund using forged signatures. You vanished for 8 years without a single word except a voicemail telling me to ask someone else for help. We were drowning. Marcus checked on me every single day for 8 years, I continued, cutting through their excuse. He attended every graduation, every important moment. He taught me about business, about integrity, about showing up especially when it's difficult. You couldn't even send a birthday card. My father's face darkened, the flush deepening to purple. That man poisoned you against us. We could ruin his reputation. Tell everyone how he... Tell them what? That he took in an abandoned teenager? That he paid for her education? That he taught her to run a business? That he never once asked for repayment or held it over my head? I pulled out my phone, showing them it was recording. Every threat you make is being documented. The security cameras are recording. If you contact me again, Morrison will file criminal charges for the forgery and theft. Through the gap in the door, I could see a patrol car turning into the driveway, its lights not yet flashing but visible in the growing dusk. My parents saw it too, their faces shifting from anger to panic. "This is really how you want it to end?" my mother asked, tears streaming down her face. "We're still your parents, Juliet. We'll always be your parents." The officers were out of their vehicle now, walking up the driveway with measured steps. My father grabbed my mother's arm, pulling her back from the door. "No," I said, my voice steady and final. "You are my parents. Past tense. You abandoned that title 8 years ago when you chose your schemes over your daughter." Marcus picked it up, carried it without complaint, and earned it through consistent action. "That's what parents do. They show up, they stay, they protect. You did none of those things." The officers reached the porch, their presence professional but firm. "Ma'am, are these the individuals named in the restraining order?" "Yes," I said, finally closing the door on their faces, on their manipulation, on 8 years of wondering if I'd been the reason they left. Through the window, I watched the officers escort them to the patrol car. My mother turned back one last time, mouthing words I couldn't hear and didn't need to. My father kept his head down, defeat finally replacing defiance. The patrol car's taillights disappeared into the darkness, taking my parents with them. I stood at the window for several minutes after they'd gone, waiting for something, regret, sadness, relief, but felt only a strange emptiness, as if a wound had finally been cleaned and could now begin healing properly. The months that followed passed in waves of activity and reflection. I threw myself into the business with renewed purpose, arriving at Blackwood Consulting each morning with the same dedication Marcus had shown for decades. The employees, initially uncertain about my leadership, gradually warmed as they saw I'd inherited more than just Marcus's shares. I'd absorbed his work ethic, his attention to detail, his ability to see 3 moves ahead in any negotiation. The austere study where Marcus had spent countless evenings became my sanctuary, though I transformed it to reflect both our styles. His heavy oak desk remained, but I added warm lighting and plants that softened the severity. The walls still held his diplomas and awards, but now they shared space with photos from company retreats and team celebrations. Images of life and connection rather than just achievement. I hired 2 junior consultants in the 3rd month, both recent graduates who reminded me painfully of myself at that age. Sarah Chin, no relation to my therapist, had the same desperate hunger to prove herself that I'd carried. James Hoffman, whose unfortunate surname made me flinch initially, worked with the intensity of someone who'd grown up with nothing and refused to go back. Training them, watching them grasp concepts and gain confidence, I finally understood why Marcus had taken such satisfaction in mentoring me. The formal dining room where Marcus and I had shared hundreds of silent meals, now hosted weekly team meetings. We'd gather around the massive table, laptops and coffee cups replacing china and crystal, discussing strategies and celebrating wins. Margaret commented once that the house finally felt alive, that Marcus would have been pleased to see it used rather than preserved. 4 months after the confrontation with my parents, I established the Marcus Blackwood Foundation for Abandoned Youth. The paperwork was complex, the legal requirements stringent, but Morrison guided me through each step with patience that reminded me of Marcus teaching me to read financial statements. The foundation would provide emergency housing, education funds, and therapy resources for young adults aged 18 to 25 who'd been abandoned by their families. "The age range is specific," Morrison noted, reviewing the charter. "That's when you need family most," I explained. "When you're technically an adult but still learning how to be one. When everyone assumes you should have support but you don't." The first scholarship recipient was a 19-year-old named David whose parents had kicked him out for refusing to join their religious community. His thank you letter sat framed on my desk beside the photo of Marcus and me at graduation. "You saved my life," he'd written. "Not just financially but by proving that strangers can become family." 5 months in, while preparing Marcus's bedroom to donate his clothes to charity, I found the box. It was tucked in the back of his closet, unlabeled and unremarkable. Inside, my entire life through his eyes unfolded in careful documentation. Every article about my college achievements, meticulously cut from newspapers and preserved in plastic sleeves. Programs from every graduation, my name highlighted in yellow. Business cards from my first week at Blackwood, kept in a small envelope marked J's beginning. Beneath these were handwritten letters, dozens of them, all addressed to me but never sent. The earliest was dated a week after I'd moved in. "Juliet, I want to tell you that your presence has altered my home in ways I didn't expect. The sound of someone else moving through these rooms is strange but not unpleasant. I hope I can provide what you need. Marcus." Another from my college graduation. "Dear Juliet, today you walked across that stage and I felt something I assume must be pride, though I have no reference point for the emotion. You have exceeded every expectation. I wish I could express." The sentence ended there, abandoned like so many attempts at emotional expression. The most recent letter was dated just a month before his diagnosis. "Juliet, there are words I should have said years ago. You changed my understanding of what family means. Not obligation or accident of birth but choice made daily, especially when difficult. You taught me that love doesn't require blood or even words, just presence. If something happens to me..." It stopped there too, but this time I knew how it would have ended. He'd shown me every day what he couldn't write. This morning, exactly 6 months after the will reading, I stood at Marcus's grave with fresh lilies, his favorite flowers, though he'd never admitted to having favorites. The headstone was simple black granite with just his name and dates, exactly as he'd specified. No elaborate epitaph, no sentimental phrases, just the facts. "The foundation approved its 20th grant yesterday," I told the stone, feeling only slightly foolish talking to granite and earth. "A young woman whose parents stole her identity, actually. Familiar story. Morrison says the tax benefits are substantial, which you'd appreciate." A breeze moved through the cemetery trees and for a moment I could almost hear Marcus's response. "Good. Efficiency in all things, including charity." The $3 million still sat largely untouched in various accounts, growing through careful investment as Marcus had taught me. But standing there, I understood with perfect clarity that the money had never been the inheritance. The real gift was the model he'd provided. How to show up consistently, how to build trust through action, how to choose family rather than simply accept it. He taught me that love doesn't announce itself with grand declarations but reveals itself in small, repeated choices. Making breakfast at 7 sharp. Sitting through uncomfortable bleachers at graduations. Teaching someone to read financial statements with the same patience you teach them to tie their shoes. Never saying "I love you," but proving it through 8 years of unbroken presence. I thought of my parents, probably in another state by now, chasing another scheme that would inevitably fail. The restraining order had held. They hadn't attempted contact again. Morrison had received one letter from their lawyer requesting reconsideration of modest financial support, which we'd declined without response. They'd made their choice 8 years ago and again 6 months ago. Some bridges, once burned, weren't meant to be rebuilt. If this story of family betrayal and ultimate vindication kept you riveted until the end, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Morrison revealed 7 years of investigative files, exposing every scheme the parents had attempted. What was your most satisfying moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more powerful stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.